and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Mueller. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today on the show, Dr. Ann Gillies is with us, along with John Mueller, to discuss the dangers of trans activism policies in home health care service. The elderly are starting to be confronted with some really toxic and dangerous individuals. We're going to talk about all of the policies, all of the people involved. It's all coming up with our special guest right after these.
Join Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Mueller as he hosts Unmasking the Trans Movement's next webinar, where we connect you with the clinical professionals who provide understanding on the many topics that make up this disturbing ideology and answer any questions you may have. Protecting the most vulnerable, women and children. Unmasking the Trans Movement. For more info on guests, dates, times, and pricing, see us online at unmaskingthetransmovement.com.
Welcome back. John Mueller is standing by. Let's bring John in. John, this is a very, very critical topic going forward, and I believe that our special guest today brings with her some critical knowledge for the seniors and the grandparents out there that we talk about every day on the show. How do they become endangered, though? Well, guess what? My parents are in the same situation. The dangers of trans activism policies in home health care services. What happens when a trans individual, a male who's decided to become female, works in the home health care industry, and then turns around and, acts in a way that, again, are you really paying for health care from an individual that has obviously mental health issues? And I say mental health issues because every day we talk about the mental health side of this issue with the trans movement. So John, where do we go from here today with our special guest? Because this is a very disturbing and yet still worthy story for many, many seniors going forward.
Brad, thank you. And this is such an important topic because most people haven't anticipated the fallout in the largest sense of the trans movement. We've looked at how this movement is placing children at risk. It is setting them up to socially transition, which then leads them to be sterilized and medicalized. We look at how it places women at risk. We've looked at how it's placing female athletes at risk. We've looked at how these deviant men are trying to and have been successful getting into prisons. We have not looked at, and very few people have looked at, the implications when it comes to the elderly. The trans movement has forced its way into the highest levels of government and therefore the highest levels of policymaking. And as goes policy, so goes practices, and so goes funding. And Gloria is here with us. I'm so appreciative, as well as Dr. Ann is back with us. And Ann, this is an eye-opening reality that if the rest of what we have talked about hasn't lit a fire under people to get involved, to think in terms of the care for the elderly. Many of those are women. And to think that trans activists, that, in other words, men in women's underwear, deviant sexual men in women's underwear and drag, are getting into positions to be caretakers for elder care and other services. And that should concern us all. And Gloria has tremendous insight, both having been in the inside of that payer process and now being on the receiving end or potential receiving end of services.
We don't have to even just think about the elderly here, because certainly they are vulnerable, but we're talking about a whole vulnerable sector that we haven't touched on, Don. You're absolutely right. So that's those individuals who are either receiving home care because they are older individuals or because they have other extenuating health care issues. So it could be someone with MS, it could be someone, just needing home care, or, even Gloria's going to talk a little bit about in the hospitals as well. And what she's going to talk about is kind of like a red flag. whoa, wait a minute, what's going to happen? Because immediately I started feeling, Gloria, like, wow, I sure don't want someone like this treating me. I don't want them coming in and taking care of my intimate needs, so to speak. So Gloria, welcome. And we are really looking forward to you kind of sharing a little bit about yourself and then talking about this issue.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that we're talking about this topic because, as you said, so many people are affected, particularly disabled people and the elderly, like myself. Some of my experience have been in human services in my career. And one of the times that I worked in the insurance industry, I learned about actually there was a CEO of an insurance company, and he was one of these what we call AGP men, autogynephilic men, and I didn't know it at the time. And I've met these people over the years, never knowing who I was dealing with. And as John said, they have infiltrated every level of society. And all of the offenses that these men have committed have been kept under a lid. It's never been talked about. Something like 50% of the transgender men in prisons are sexual offenders. And we never hear about this. So being in this position myself is very frightening. Being alone, being a senior in needing services, needing in-home care service, and sometimes hospital services. I had no idea how deep this issue went until about a year and a half ago when I was sitting on the medical board, and there were 3 men who were identifying as women, one of them was running the meetings. And he had a lot of leverage and was constant, and the entire meeting revolved around trans issues. This was for a period of months. That's all they ever talked about. There was 3 of them. And what happened to bring my awareness, or as some call pique my awareness, was the pronoun usage. I had seen periodically pronouns being used on social media. And I had never been in a meeting before with people using pronouns. I had been in other meetings in an entirely different field. So everybody was using pronouns, and I didn't have any pronouns in my bio. And every single meeting, we had to introduce ourselves and use pronouns. The first meeting, I used the pronouns because I was new to the board, the medical board. The second time, I didn't use the pronouns, and I was pushed by this trans activist to use, and what are your pronouns? And I changed the subject. So I was pushed for months to use pronouns, and I didn't outright say I wasn't going to use pronouns, but I didn't. I would change the subject. And then I received an email before a meeting saying that I was going to receive diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And I needed to be there at the start of the meetings. And I have technical problems starting my meetings, as you probably are aware of.
That happens to us all, doesn't it?
So I missed the first part of this meeting, which was specifically targeted toward me, because I was the only one out of 20 people who wasn't using pronouns. So what I did was, after this meeting, this man who was running the meeting called himself by a woman's name, and he was dressed in, his hair, his makeup, and everything. What I did was I complained. I went outside of the board and I complained. And I said, no one compels me to speech. No one tells me what to think, what to say, or how to act. Compelled speech is the first step in fascism. And the next meeting I had, he began to interrupt me constantly, saying he had to leave, he had to go to another meeting, but he would not leave. He would just constantly interrupt me when I was making presentations. Mm-hmm. So, and then at the very next meeting, he said to me, there are other committees that we can find that would be a better fit for you. And so he was trying to get me kicked off the committee.
Gloria, this sounds very much like bullying to me.
Oh yes,
You're being bullied.
For many months, I was upset. And I didn't know who to talk to, because a lot of the people in Oregon are woke, as they say. They buy into this. This is a very complex problem in the sense of it's a grand manipulation. Be kind, and it's particularly targeted toward women. And women feel guilty when we're not kind. That we are the kind, nurturing type. Kind of in our DNA, and we want to be compassionate. And we want to. But as one fellow was saying to us, he said, you women, you've got to stop being so nice. And I'm no longer pleasant anymore. I'm very.
Gloria, if you don't mind, you've referenced medical board. For our viewers, could you clarify what you mean by you were on a medical board? Because this is very important.
Well, there's our medical system is very complicated. So there's
in the state of Oregon.
Yeah, this is the state of Oregon, and I decided to contribute as a citizen's advocate, because I had done advocacy on and off my whole life. I worked with politicians and in voluntary capacities, and particularly I became more active in medical services.
So this was the Medicaid board for the state of for the state of Oregon. Is that correct?
Oregon. Yes.
So you started to see there was a dramatic shift based upon personnel, based upon people that ended up having an agenda. You saw shall we say, a favoritism, as it were?
Yes, they were getting all kinds of services, and I found out that that the taxpayer money was going toward transgender female facialization surgery, hormones, and cross-sex hormones, and all of these medical interventions. And then I found out that Planned Parenthood was actually getting money for this, taxpayer money for this. And they had previously been helping women. And when I went to Planned Parenthood for menopausal consultations, they turned me away. And that was about 10 years ago. And I had no idea. They just said, "Oh, we don't handle that age group. They're more for the younger reproductive services, younger women."
This brings up another question, Gloria, because what's going through my mind is what you were saying, the services that are being funneled to transgender interests. Does that mean then, from the hospital, not so much Planned Parenthood, but Medicaid, does that mean that other individuals might be underserviced, or there might be less services or money available for, say, cancer treatment or something like that? I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I actually asked about this on a different level. I went to the federal level to Admiral Levine. He calls himself Rachel Levine, but he's really Richard Levine. He runs the entire federal medical system in the United States. He's in charge of it, and he's a transgender, a male who calls himself a woman. I went to him and asked him, and of course he ignored me. I asked him, where's the cure for cancer when you're spending all this money in transgender sex reassignment or whatever they're doing? And yes, we are. The services here in the state are abominable. I've had 4 doctors in 2 years, different doctors. Doctors keep leaving. Some doctors do not want to comply with all of these requirements. It's when I first came here 2 years ago, and I filled out the paperwork at the clinic I went to, it was all about your gender. All these questions, how do you identify this, that, and the other thing? And I was filling out this application, and I went up to the counter, and I'm like, why are you asking all these ridiculous questions? Just kind of put their head down and said, you don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
It's really changed. Gloria, if we're going to have you back. We're compressed by time, unfortunately, so we're just going to kind of get an overview, because your story and what you have to share is so important. So let me ask, as you had mentioned prior to recording, that you began to ask questions and you found yourself on the receiving end from this state board. You found yourself on the receiving end of a whole lot of pushback, a negative pushback that had implications for you.
Oh, I couldn't get a caregiver for months, and medical transport. And I cannot pinpoint, but I'm almost sure that these men were upset with me. And I know it has affected my health, because I've never in my life experienced what I experienced. I've been through a lot in my careers, and with the harassment and bullying and sexual harassment and everything. But this, I was always able to handle that. This was something that it was almost as if the history pages were coming off the book, because I know the stages of fascism. I'm very familiar that the last stage of fascism is self-censorship. And everyone that I was communicating with has self-censored. I just got another email from a former professor of mine who will not talk to me about this issue. So I began to realize that, and all of these other people who were like, I've seen, there are famous people, but there are also not so famous people who have been censored, like Jordan Peterson. And then I have friends myself, or colleagues that I knew who were censored. And they actually censored themselves because of the fear of losing their jobs and things. And it became, to me, I realized, I thought, well, I'm in a position where I need care, and these people are in control of my care. And if I don't comply, they can withhold my care, which could be life and death for me. And and I realize this is just not my situation. Many, many people are in this situation. And this situation needs light on it. It needs to be illuminated. And the mask, if you will, or the veil, is human rights. And this is a very carefully orchestrated movement. And it must come to light. Everyone must know what we are dealing with here. We are dealing with high military personnel with lots of power. We're dealing with
It's very
technocrats.
dangerous. Let me just interrupt for a second. I just wanted to ask you this, and that's what we've been certainly working on, is exposing these things, and it's really good that you're understanding those things. So, Gloria, when it comes to your own personal care, bringing it kind of into this personal place, because we can see that there's some definite health concerns you have. And so you yourself need people to come into the home to take care of you. And tell me your greatest fear about this.
Oh, I don't want to talk about my personal experience, but there are many women who have been sexually abused and raped and so forth. And yeah, I have a tremendous fear of this. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that if I requested a female caregiver or requested female healthcare practitioners, and I've had male health doctors and things, but I never, until I began to learn about how sick and twisted these autogynephilic, fetishistic, porn-addicted men are, and I learned from the internet and from other women who wrote books about it and other men who wrote books about it. It's a terrifying prospect for me. I mean, I just can't imagine. There was a time when I was incapacitated for a couple of months, and thank goodness none of those men came. But I didn't realize that how prevalent they were in the field until I was on.
This is what is a huge concern then, because for you, when someone's incapacitated and they are expecting a female nurse, a female practitioner, and then they actually are sent or assigned a cross-sex identifying individual who, for all purposes, it basically maybe has all their male parts, right? A lot of them do not have sexual reassignment surgery. So that, I can certainly understand your fear there. And I don't know about you, John, but I've never thought about this. Never even thought about how dangerous that could be. But you just identify it big time.
I want to say also that these men are also violent, extremely violent, and we've seen examples of that on the internet. And also, a woman in Britain was attacked. This woman who here, Riley Gaines in the United States, she was attacked, and women are being attacked, physically attacked by these violent men who self-identify as women. And they demand access to our private, intimate spaces. They want to take over all of female spaces. And they are extremely aggressive and violent. There are very few of them, I'm sure, that want to live quiet, as they say, quiet lives. The rest of them, and not only are they violent, but many of them are on drugs. I know what drug addiction looks like. And I would say methamphetamine, cocaine, ecstasy, all of the combination of all those drugs, street drugs. They're on these drugs. I can tell by their behavior when I watch their videos.
Can I ask you this? In your medical system, would a healthcare provider not be required to have some kind of drug testing at least?
Yes, they are required, but I'm not really sure if all drugs are detectable in tests, and they also have there are these things that you can take to take drugs out of your system for drug tests.
And Gloria, let me speak to that, because you've just referenced, and that's a very real concern, right? Drugs can be masked. And that was a very legitimate question, because and you had just referenced that, I could hear people, Gloria, attempting to kind of downplay or poo-poo your concerns with, well, come on, we drug test our employees on a regular basis. We're a human services organization. We do in-home health care. The one thing that people need to understand, and my background working with sexual predators bears this out, is the more a man gets into pornography. Now, people say, well, listen, cross-dressing predated pornography. Correct. But ever since the 1980s, things have changed. And now we have seen, and it's, Gloria, exactly what you brought up. We see Riley Gaines. We see Kelly J. Keene. We have seen an all-out assault. Never have we seen men that are cross-dressing, wearing women's underwear and cross-dressing, yelling and screaming and wearing shirts that say "kill TERFs." Different ball game now. And based upon my background working with men that are deeply steeped in pornography, I can tell you, the more a man gets into this deviant pornography, he develops a malevolence, a deep disdain toward women. My contention is, based upon my experience, he's developing a desire to defile children, and they know that the women will be the last bastion, the protective guard against kids. They want to get rid of women. Therefore, you can have a man that may or may not be on drugs. This malevolence is very overpowering for these men, and therefore it presents a very clear and present danger to have a man who thinks it's a reasonable issue to dress in women's underwear. Only men that have been steeped in pornography think that. So they dress in women's underwear first, then drag. And you now have agencies that are having to hire these men and wanting to hire these men. And now they get a call. So they are a human service provider for in-home services. And somebody, Gloria, such as yourself or somebody in need, so maybe our mothers, our grandmothers, and they are put on the list to receive care, and in walks a 6-foot biological male dressed in drag. This is a very scary prospect because, again, knowing how I know how these deviant men operate, let's say he starts to approach her and he's encroaching upon her. She needs personal care, help to the bathroom, in the bathroom, and showering. Well, she's not comfortable with this. The one thing a sexual psychopath does not take kindly to are boundaries. And therefore she says no, and now you have the equivalent of a domestic violence situation. And now, how easy is it for him to say, as he's filling out an incident report, she slipped? What might he have done? He pushes her down, he hits her in the face. He's going to bring her into submission so he can sexually assault her. Now, are we saying that every single man that dresses in drag is going to assault a woman? No. But who would have guessed what we saw unfold for Kelly J. Keene in New Zealand, or Riley Gaines in the US? This is a different day and age where these men who are jacked up on hormones, who are steeped in porn, create a very dangerous situation, and they should not be around vulnerable women in private spaces. And talk about the most vulnerable, where you have an older woman, could be my mother, could be my grandmother, and we don't know, we're trusting. So you could have adult children arrange for mother to be cared for, assuming that the care she's receiving is fine, yet in walks the 6-foot individual, and before you know it, he says she fell against the tub. This is extremely concerning. Gloria, you are bringing to our attention the very real world outworkings, the implications. And for those providers or a person that says, I'm concerned about this. What you're saying is you saw that dollars could possibly be delayed, if not found a reason to be refused, if somebody says that they are concerned about this.
Yes, and it's not only myself. I read about this after I had this experience. I read about it that a woman, I can't remember what country it was in, she was denied care because she refused to have one of these self-ID men take care of her. And any man can self-ID at any time if these laws are not repealed or stopped. So it could be any psychopath in the street who decides he has an opportunity to prey on innocent women and people. It's just really horrific.
Well, you've exposed so much to us here today, Gloria. It's simply amazing that you've seen what you've seen, and your evaluation on what's happening is, well, it's going to be overwhelming for some of us that are 50, 55 years old, 45 years old, with their grandparents, or their parents, all going into facilities like that in the future. And we have to be concerned now. We have to up our game. We have to take it one step farther now. Do our due diligence as their children. I mean, your parents have been looking out for you. It's our turn to step up now and look out for them. And without you exposing this here today, Gloria, we wouldn't know any of this. We might not have even thought about it until it was really too late. And I think that we're going to get this and be proactive with this and do the due diligence that needs to be done to make sure that the right screening, the right processes are taken to make sure that these deviant individuals don't bust into that system. And I'll be honest with you, as a dad and a son, and I can't imagine what I would do if I found out that some deviant individual was doing that to my mother or my father. So with that, we have to wrap up today's show. I'll leave that thought in everybody's mind, because I think that's probably the most important part of today's lesson, is that we all need to start paying more attention to the surroundings that we're putting ourselves and our family members in going forward. Gloria, thank you for being here. We're going to have you back again, as John would say. Dr. Ann, thank you very much for all your expertise today. And John, always a pleasure. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement. You can find our episodes on unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Check out our website. You can sign up, become a member. Also, join our webinars. We have weekly webinars with Dr. Ann and John and other broadcast guests who bring a wealth of knowledge to each and every webinar they host. There's more to come right here on Unmasking the Trans Movement. You can find us as well on our BitChute channel too. Just search Unmasking the Trans Movement. Until next time, I'm Brad Wilder. Remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight.